Hi, welcome back to our second episode in our Equip series on biblical interpretation and application. If you tuned into our last episode, we're just going to recap quickly. We spoke about the Bible not being a book, rather it is a library with different authors and genres and context of writing that is all written together to create a collective story. The Bible is like an ocean. And so if we're going to go swimming in the ocean, we need to have the right equipment. And today, in today's episode, we're actually going to talk about getting prepared to have some of those tools so that we can go diving into the deep, wide ocean of the Bible. So it's going to be exciting.
Yes, thank you. So our theme passage is 1 Timothy 2:15. It says, "Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth." And so really what we're after is we want to do our best to handle the scriptures, to understand the scriptures first of all, and then to be able to teach those in whatever context we're in as best we can, to handle the word of truth well. So that's what we're after.
So today we're going to get a little more hands-on, and we're going to learn some tools, and we're actually going to use them today in examples, right, to show you guys how that is applicable.
Yeah, so there are three words we're going to refer to at the beginning of this conversation, and it's hermeneutics, exegesis, and eisegesis.
Big words.
Yes, they sound technical, but they're really pretty simple to understand. Essentially, hermeneutics is an area of study. It's kind of the science of how we interpret scripture. And the root of hermeneutics comes from Hermes in Greek mythology. Hermes was a messenger between gods. He delivered and interpreted messages. And so hermeneutics is the science of interpreting.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's interpreting any text. It can be a religious text or not a religious text. But and if you do a Google search of hermeneutics, you're going to find all kinds of tools to do this. And there's 4-step processes and 6-step processes and 20-step processes of how to do good hermeneutics if you look. But we're going to give you a 2-step process.
Oh, that's good.
Yes.
It's helpful.
So the 2 steps are this. You want to find out what was the author's intent, and we'll talk about how to get there. And you want to find out what did it mean to the audience who is receiving that. So what's the author's intent? What did it mean for the people reading or hearing or listening or learning this information?
Oh, that's really helpful. Even today in our texting, right,
Yes.
world, I would love to learn what all the intentions are behind the texts I receive.
Yeah. What did they mean by that?
What did they mean by this?
You read the text with a face and a sigh.
And a voice.
Right. Yeah.
So we do that with the Bible too.
We do that with the Bible too. That's right. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So we'll start with, that's hermeneutics, right? So then exegesis is kind of a tool of hermeneutics. And exegesis is the process of pulling the meaning out. And so you think Exodus, right? The people came out of Egypt. Exegesis is how do we get the meaning out of Scripture? And the basic principle that we'll kind of repeat today is it cannot mean today what it didn't mean then. It cannot mean today what it didn't mean then. So how do you find out what it meant when it was written? How do you find out what the author's intent was and what it would have meant to the people hearing it? So here are 5 steps to do exegesis. And again, kind of like hermeneutics, you could probably find 20 steps. I'm just going to give you 5. They're not super difficult to remember, and they're pretty, I think, intuitive. So the first is historical context. You want to go, hey, when was this written? So if I'm reading something in the Bible, is this an Old Testament writing that's pre-law? Is it during the inception of the law? Is it after the law? Is this pre-resurrection in the New Testament? Is it post-resurrection? Because that informs on the historical plot line of the writing, what did the author even understand about the present and the future and the past? So historical context matters. Second is literary context. And this is kind of who's writing, who are they writing to, what's the occasion, why are they writing? So is this Paul, is this Solomon, is this King David, is this one of the prophets? Who's the audience that they're writing to? And what's the occasion? Is this exile? Is this a situation happening in the church? What's going on? So historical context, literary context, and then the genre. We talked about this last time. Bible is full of all kinds of different genres.
Poetry and
historical narratives and law code and letters and all kinds of. So what's the genre? Because that informs, again, how we will interpret. And then 4 is contemporary meanings of the words. So what do these words mean, right? And obviously a lot of them will be simple, but even last time we talked about
the religion.
There was one word in our Bible that said religion, but when we looked at the Greek, it had 2 different meanings in the Greek. And so this is where just a good lexicon, there's all kinds of Bible lexicons out there, Strong's, there's an online version one that you can get at blueletterbible.org.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, just simple stuff that you can find and go, hey, well, what's the meaning? And then the last one is parallel passages. So are there other passages that talk about the same event or person? The Gospels are great at this because you have 4 of them, and you have you share a lot of the same stories. 1st and 2nd Samuel, are telling the story of David. A lot of the Psalms are written about the episodes that you see in those books. So it's how do you gather information from other parallels in the Bible that help illuminate what you're reading? So historical context, literary context, the genre, the meaning of words, and parallel passages. Now, obviously, we're never going to, I won't say never, but we may never fully understand the author's intent. Just like we may never fully understand what it would have meant for people who lived thousands of years ago. But we're doing our best to handle the word of truth and to get as close as possible so we can interpret it as best as possible for our listeners today. But it cannot mean today what it didn't mean to them then. Yes.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. So that's hermeneutics, that's exegesis. Now there's another word, eisegesis. Tell me about that.
Okay, so eisegesis is the opposite of exegesis.
Okay.
And we are super good at this as Christians.
I don't think this is going to go well.
Yeah, so exegesis is pulling the meaning out. Eisegesis is we put the meaning into a text.
Submit to me, woman, in the name of the Lord kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. We have plenty of eisegesis for that passage, right? So an example might be Philemon 1:6. This is one that I think at least relates to some of our fellowship. So it says this, and I pray that the sharing of your faith may be effective for the full knowledge of every good thing that is for us for the sake of Christ. So we read this as 21st century Christians in evangelical movement, and we hear a phrase like sharing your faith. And ding, we know what that means.
Door knocking, cold
evangelism,
contact,
right? Like we're going to go talk about Jesus with people. And so we read this passage and we start to go, okay, well, Paul's talking about sharing your faith. And if we share our faith, then we understand all the good things in Jesus. Oh man, I gotta talk to my small group about this, right? So we bring this message to our small group and we develop a lesson about sharing your faith so you can understand all the things that you have in Jesus. And I mean, it's practically a conditional statement that Paul's making. Like, and if you don't, will you really understand all the things? And the problem is that Paul's not talking about evangelism at all, right? There are plenty of passages that talk about evangelism. This just isn't one of them. Paul's talking about sharing the same common faith in Jesus. That, hey, Philemon and Paul, we have the same faith in Jesus. Like, let's partner in that. That's the emphasis, right? But you wouldn't know that if you didn't do some work ahead of time, right?
He's talking more about the walking with the day-to-day, right?
Yes, exactly. So that's an example. We do this in all kinds of ways. Modern evangelical movements for a while now have put all kinds of eisegesis into prophetic writings and apocalyptic writing. We love the book of Revelation for this. We can find all kinds of meanings for animals and numbers and that mean things today that they didn't mean when they were written.
Well, and unfortunately, that could be a turnoff to many people, right? Because they make something that wasn't there.
We read something that has an eagle in the book of Revelation, and suddenly we think they must be talking about America because it's our national bird is the eagle. And so, but look, John didn't know about America. He didn't know an eagle was going to be the national bird. Like he didn't know, so we can't, again, it can't mean today what it didn't mean back then. Right. It had a particular reason to be written by a particular person to a particular audience in a particular historical context. And we've got to discover what that is so then we can figure out the application.
Got it.
So does that help? Or does that make sense?
That's good.
So just a quick side note there, there's a couple of great books out there. How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. It's a book by Douglas Stewart and Gordon Fee. And then they have another book, How to Read the Bible Book by Book. So they're just helpful resources that offer a lot of context.
Great. So, then to recap, the hermeneutics then is the science, right?
Yes, kind of area of study.
The science of studying what Scripture means. And then the tool, one of the tools is exegesis, right? Sure. On how we extract. Okay. So then how would this look like practically? I'm a small group leader. I want to use exegesis in my next lesson. Walk me through that.
Yeah, you want to interpret well. You want to be able to offer a good lesson. So pick your text, right? Then you're going to apply some hermeneutics. What's the author's intent? What would it mean for the audience? And you're going to figure out the context. Do some good exegesis here. Figure out the context. And then discuss application. So the process is kind of like text, context, and then application. Because you really want to do a good job with context so that you can make sure you're applying it in a good way. Right. Yes, in the right way. Okay. So so you figure out your text. Again, I know we're using kind of heady words or academic sounding words. This is not like finding the context is not about writing a dissertation or, having a lecture. You can give simple context for a passage in 2 or 3 sentences in less than a minute. But it just helps for people to have a setting for what they're reading, and it protects against Eisegesis.
Right? And again, that's the intent, who it was written to, right? Those are the 2 things we want.
Yes, what's the author's intent and what would it have meant, right? And so you do some exegesis to discover that. So you got to do some prep work. So let's just give an example, right? Say you read this text, you want to do a small group lesson on the passage, the salt and the light. You're the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world, right? And we know this passage in Matthew 5. And so you've got your text. Well, what's the next step? You want to figure out your context, right? So you dig in a little bit. What's the historical context? Who's speaking? Who's writing? Literary context. Who's the audience? Who's the audience of the letter? But also who's the audience in the scene, right? So Jesus is speaking to first century Jewish people. This is not, the cross hasn't happened yet. Like, they're still under the Old Testament. They know the Old Testament really well. He's coming and teaching some new things as a rabbi. Like, you discover something about the context, right? What was their setting? What was life like as a first century Jewish person in Palestine? You were under Roman occupation. You were, being oppressed in many ways. And so you're just discovering what's the text, what's the context that's happening here. I think at that point you kind of have to just figure out what you want to give people versus what you want to journey with people, like discover with them. So you can give people the context. You could say in very, very simple terms, like, hey, you tee up the scripture, you read it, and then you go, hey, Jesus is a first century rabbi. He's speaking to people who believe the Old Testament. They're searching for God, but they're feeling all kinds of oppression, and they're confused about what it means to follow God. And here he comes, and he teaches who they are and what they're to do. And like, you can give,
spoon feed it in a way. Yeah.
Or you could take people along that journey in your small group, and you go, hey, well, what do you think? Who was Jesus's audience when he said this? People and you can help guide that a little bit. And what would it have meant to be a first century Jew in Palestine, you think? And what would have been the challenges, your everyday challenges that you faced? And you kind of help people discover that, go along the process of
if
context.
People don't know,
then
maybe you can show them how to go on that journey, right? What tools to use,
and that's a really good, again, it's kind of implicit discipleship. You're teaching people how to think about Scripture, how to study Scripture, Bible, right? Which we do this all the time. But it's great in a small group setting to do and to be able to model for people, for sure. Yeah. So you set the context. Now here, maybe you found a parallel passage. Maybe you did a little bit of study and you realized, oh man, this thing that Jesus says about the light of the world actually shows up other places in the Bible. And again, these are Old Testament believers. Okay, here's Isaiah talking about being a light to the Gentiles, a light of the world to the Gentiles. I wonder if that's what they would have heard. Probably. Right. These are people who are familiar with the Old Testament.
Yeah, would have rang a bell. They would have read that before. Heard it before.
Heard this before. Yeah. Light to the world. I'm supposed to be a light to the Gentiles, or at least the Messiah was going to make people who are a light to the Gentiles. Okay, so now you've set the context. You know what this passage, at least a pretty good idea of the author's intent. What's the application of that? Well, I'm a first century Jewish person under Roman rule. And here's this Messiah, this rabbi maybe, I don't know if he's the Messiah yet, but he's telling me I'm to be the covenant light for the Gentiles. Who are the Gentiles in your life? The Romans, the people that are not easy to get along with, right? Not your favorite people in the world. okay, so this is what's happening. This is
Wow.
what Jesus is
Yeah.
driving after. Well, then you can start asking some great discussion questions about application, like,
Who are the Romans in my life?
yeah, maybe maybe not who the Romans, but you know, what is the light that Jesus is calling us to shine in this passage? It's good deeds. Okay, well, what if Jesus is saying this to us today as a small group? Jesus came and said, hey, I want you to be a light to the Gentiles, to the other in your life. With your good deeds, what might that look like for us as a small group? Who are the people that are hardest to love with the love of God in your life?
Right.
You know, what can you do this week to be a light to those people in your workspace or at your school? Or,
Sure.
again, you can start to bring the application a little bit more. It's just a sturdier application because you've done some good interpretation of the scripture.
And it's so much more inspiring than, I need you all to go out and do X, Y, and Z, and here's the scripture, here's the address that tells you why you need to do this.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Yeah. Or talking about sin, because somehow you associate light and darkness with sin, and so you didn't really do any, you know, prep work. You didn't dig in. You didn't do hermeneutics. You didn't dig into exegesis to draw out meaning. You just saw light. You associated darkness. Maybe you pulled another passage from another place and you said, okay, Jesus is calling us to be in the light. We've got to be confessional people.
Right.
We've got to, like, you know, you can make the text suddenly about
Sure.
what it's not about, right? And have a whole discussion on it. And it may be a really good discussion, like really helpful, but it's not handling the word of truth correctly.
Right.
So
Yeah, no, that's great.
text,
That's interesting.
context, and then application. Take some time to prepare. Take people on a journey. People love to discover. They love to discover in conversation. Discover with them. Have questions that will help them if they're having trouble along the way. But arrive at some context together, or just give them the context. Again, not a lot, just a little bit of
Sure.
context. I think this sets you up to ask the right questions too, which we can sometimes ask the wrong questions in small group, like, what does this mean to you? Or when you
Okay.
read this, what is God saying to you?
Which is just leading them into eisegesis.
Right. It's kind of leading you into like, well,
What
let
you shouldn't be
me
doing.
figure out what this
Yeah.
means to me, like personal interpretation.
Right.
But the Bible is a communally interpreted thing. We're supposed to talk about it together and figure it out. So that's
Right.
the idea.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I
Okay.
think it should make small group a lot more fun, a lot more
Yes, yeah,
interactive,
yeah.
and not just all on the small group leader, maybe.
Sure.
Well, that was it for the second episode. Just to recap what we spoke about today, hermeneutics is discovering the author's intent
Yes.
and understanding what it meant. Exegesis is a tool, right, of what do we get out of the text, not what we're putting into it.
Right.
Eisegesis is what we should not be doing, which is putting our
avoiding
own,
that, for
right, we're
sure.
avoiding putting our
Yes.
own meaning into what's already there. I love the reminder, it cannot mean today what it did not mean then.
That's it.
So
That's key.
we can keep ourselves safe there. But there's so many more tools available to us now as modern day Christians than we've ever
That's
had.
true. Yeah.
So this should be a fun and somewhat easy journey to go on. There will be links, I'm sure, to books and websites
Yeah, there's so much great content.
to help you on this
Yeah.
journey. But
Yeah.
thanks again for joining us, and
Hope this helps.
yeah,
Yeah.
bye.